Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I think we'll go in and get started. So I first want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. My name is Jennifer Souter, and I'm the Director of Patents and Licensing here at WiSys. For those that aren't familiar with WiSys, we're a nonprofit organization that works with faculty, staff, students, and alumni of the UW system to help facilitate cutting-edge research programs, develop and commercialize discoveries, and foster a spirit of innovative and entrepreneurial thinking across the state. As a supporting organization of the UW system, we manage a number of internal grant programs at WiSys as well as on behalf of the UW system. Today, we're going to be focusing on the WiSys Spark Grant program and UW System's Ignite Grant for Applied Research. I'm joined today in the background by my colleague, Deborah Lundeen, who is WiSys's pre-award manager for sponsored programs. Deborah will be helping to facilitate Q&A at the conclusion of the webinar and is also available for follow-up discussion after the event. I believe we also have some of WiSys's regional associates joining us today. We will be taking a short Q&A after the information is presented for the Spark program, and you can also submit questions throughout the session using the Q&A feature on Zoom. Also, as a reminder, you will receive a PDF of this presentation following the session, which will also be available on demand following the event. So as mentioned for today, we're going to focus on two grant programs. For Spark, we're going to focus on a general overview of the program, including a summary of projects that have been funded over the past 2 fiscal years, guidance notes, so when you're ready to apply, and also upcoming deadlines for the UW comprehensive campuses. For Ignite, where we'll spend most of our time today, we're going to focus on really what makes a project fundable, general program guidelines, campus statistics, for submissions and awards, proposal development reminders, as well as bits about the structured template, budget considerations, submission guidelines, and lastly, the review and appraisal. We're then going to conclude with the Q&A. So for the WiSys Spark Grant program, so this was first piloted in 2018, and the goal really was to encourage the development of early stage applied research projects that had intellectual property potential. These projects are typically shorter in term, anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and have a maximum budget of generally $10,000. The program is competitive and it is open to all UW comprehensive campuses and requires a submission of a new invention disclosure to WiSys. We really view Spark as an opportunity to generate preliminary data that can go on to support a future submission of an external grant, such as the Ignite research program. So in terms of breadth of activity, over the past 2 years, we've really received and funded proposals from a variety of academic disciplines and areas. And so here you can see some examples from chemistry, material science, biology, engineering, and computer science. We've also seen projects in the ag space, as well as nutrition and sustainable technology. So while we can't share more details about these projects themselves, you can consider approaching your campus colleagues who have been awarded to share their experiences on this program and learn more about how they were successful. So in terms of guidance notes for Spark, while applicants are allowed to submit more than one application, you are limited to 1 award per fiscal year. Funds are limited to supplies and expenses, faculty salary up to 50% of the budget, and student stipends. We ask that applicants please work with their respective grants offices on the submission of these programs. And as mentioned earlier, this program does require a new invention disclosure to WiSys. And if you're not familiar with the invention disclosure process, I would certainly encourage you to reach out to your WiSys regional associate to learn more. And I've provided their contact details at the end of this presentation for ease of reference. The application for this program is only 2 to 3 pages in length, and proposals are ultimately scored based on intellectual property and commercial potential, the level of preliminary data that you've generated, and really project feasibility. So upcoming deadlines for each of the participating campuses are shown here. If you're interested in applying or have questions, please reach out to your grants office and or WiSys regional associate to learn more. More information can also be found on our website here. So before we move on to Ignite, I wanted to see if there were any questions from the audience specifically related to the Spark Grant program. And keep in mind, you can also ask these at the end of the session. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any immediate questions, so I'll move on. So switching gears to Ignite, the goal of the Ignite grant program for applied research is really to advance the knowledge economy and particularly provide for economic impact to the state of Wisconsin. However, in the past, there is also an emphasis on that broader impact beyond the state. For the humanities and social sciences, that potential impact could really also be directed towards societal impact, things like quality of life, culture, environmental impact, as well as impact on human health, public policy, and services. So the state legislator and governor provide UW system with funding annually for its applied research grant program. So the Ignite grant program for applied research is competitive and it is open to all UW campuses as well as academic disciplines, including the social sciences and humanities. So due to the financial impacts of the pandemic, unfortunately, UW system has suspended temporarily applications for prototype development funding. Generally, we would also promote that program as part of this webinar. However, if anyone has any prototyping needs or shorter term projects, please feel free to reach out to your regional associate to learn more about other possible funding options that might be available through WiSys. So today's presentation will focus on the Ignite grant program for applied research. So in terms of eligibility criteria and fundability for Ignite grants, projects should be well aligned with the core purpose of the grant program, which is really to apply research and scholarship to the economic development of the state. The project should have potential for significant economic impact within Wisconsin, but really with tangible and measurable outcomes. That's very important. These could really range anywhere from creating jobs to reducing costs, improving quality of products, promoting competitiveness of Wisconsin businesses, as well as that positive cultural and environmental change. In addition, the project plan must be clearly defined, contain measurable milestones, and ultimately be technically feasible. So the funding limit for Ignite applied research is $50,000 per project proposal. However, there is an increased emphasis on cost efficiency from the review panel and UW system. So we ask that just because $50,000 is the upper limit, that you take into account if the project can be undertaken at a lower level without compromising the integrity or the quality of the project proposal. We recommend that you take these steps in order to increase your competitiveness. So for this program, UW-Madison and UW-Milwaukee are limited to 2 Ignite awards per funding cycle. However, we certainly encourage both campuses to collaborate on Ignite proposals with a regional comprehensive. And again, this is highly encouraged by system as well. The funding term for this program is 14 months, and projects awarded during the 21-22 cycle will commence on July 1st, 2021, and should be completed by August 31st, 2022. So each year I like to show a little bit of the campus statistics, and this is statistics over the past 5 years. So over the past 5 years, you can see the spread of submissions versus awards across the UW system, and this is a 5-year average. So since fiscal year 16-17, we've processed over 200 applications and have administered nearly 60 awards across the state. And in general, as you can see here, campuses that submit more applications are seeing more awards made. And on average, the success rate is around 30%. As you can see here too, in the past, we've seen our highest number of submissions from Eau Claire, Platteville, Stout, and Milwaukee. So to give you a feel for the type and breadth of projects funded, this is a list of awards made during 2021. So some things I'd like to highlight is that 5 of the 11 funded were first-time submitters, and I believe there's quite a few first-time submitters here today with us. Also, 9 of the 11 were from the UW Comprehensives, and there were 2 proposals funded to UW-Milwaukee, one in the STEM area and one in the social sciences. So as you can see here, proposals again were funded across a breadth of disciplines from microbiology to chemistry to engineering, business, ag, sustainability, as well as businesses and the social sciences. So speaking of social sciences, while at a glance it may appear that the majority of proposals are funded from the hard sciences, we do see a number of social sciences and humanities proposals submitted and awarded each year. In this graph, you can see the 5-year average of submissions from the social sciences as compared to total submissions and those that are funded. And so as such, I'd like to take a few minutes now to talk through a few examples of successful humanities projects. And I believe we have a few attendees in the room from these areas. So this project is out of UW-Milwaukee from a faculty member from the School of Architecture and Urban Planning. And it was focused on developing a mobile furniture system that could be used to retrofit existing vacant storefronts in the Milwaukee area, really for use by entrepreneurs as well as the community. So the PI identified this unmet need based on data, which really showed that underserved communities surrounding Milwaukee were being left behind. Vacant storefronts were being underutilized, and entrepreneurs in these areas really didn't have adequate resources, including space. So his goal was to encourage economic and social growth by creating a novel retrofit design system that could be easily implemented to support the growing entrepreneurial ecosystem in these areas. So the project had clear and concise objectives that, again, could be quantified. And these included things like determining the entrepreneurial needs of the community through interviews and surveys, constructing the furniture itself that's going to support those needs, and then ultimately determining the success of these pieces through follow-on interviews and surveys. So this project is currently underway and commenced for the 2021 cycle. So what made this project competitive was really that it was seen to use innovative application of architectural expertise for the economic development, specifically of Milwaukee. It also, though, had potential to have broader impact through development of a model that could easily be scaled to other underserved areas. There was also a tangible benefit in the furniture system itself that would fill a specific need in the economic community. This project also had very strong support from the institution as well as the private sector. So this next project was out of UW Oshkosh from a faculty member from the Center for Customized Research and Services. And it focused on the development of a strategic framework for the Wisconsin's paper industry. So for this project, the PI had recognized the need for the development of a more proactive strategy based upon the challenges that the paper and pulp industry were facing or had been facing and will continue to face from things like global competition, changing consumer tastes, all of which were resulting in plant closings and job losses. So the project, again, had clear and concise objectives that could be quantified. These included things like the design and administration of an industry talents needs survey across pulp, paper, and converting industry firms, forestry firms, and so on, and the completion of an innovation and sustainability assessment of the industry as a whole, and ultimately publication of the strategic framework that the Wisconsin Paper Council could then utilize. So ultimately, this project aimed to support the Wisconsin paper industry by providing a strategic framework containing best practices, policy, as well as program recommendations for coordinating an industry-wide change in the state. It also had competitive intelligence that mapped out expected industry disruptions for the future. Again, what made this project competitive was that it was actually very well drafted. It was also very highly relevant to a significant industry for the state. And the impact was clearly laid out alongside the needs that the project was addressing that ultimately provided a unified strategy for the paper industry as a whole. So this project here was funded in 1920 out of UW Extension from a faculty member from the Department of Labor Education. So it focused on an investigation into best practices for the support of women's entry and success into the building constructions trade. The PI here identified an unmet need based on the fact that women comprise just under half of the US workforce, but building construction trades are composed of around 96% male, and they continue to face labor shortages. So as such, the PI felt that women are an excellent recruitment source that are capable of stemming this shortage in this industry. So for this project, she aimed to look at 3 different issues to address her goal. They included optimal procedures for recruitment of women in these trades, how to rapidly train and orient women to acquire jobs in these trades, and also factors that contribute to the retention of women in these trades. Again, had clear and concise objectives, which included increasing the awareness of the building trade as a feasible career path for women. This was done through targeted marketing, establishing a pre-apprenticeship program for a cohort of around 10 to 20 women using best practices, and ultimately evaluating the program's effectiveness. So ultimately, this project aimed to support the construction industry by filling open positions and increasing the supply of new workers, and also enhancing the quality of Wisconsin's workforce. What made this project competitive was that the potential for impact was thoughtfully conceived and very clearly communicated. The PI also had very strong letters of support from partner organizations that demonstrated the unmet needs she was addressing. and why it was really important for Wisconsin as well as the nation as a whole. And the final project I'll discuss for social sciences was supported in 1920 as well. And this was out of UW River Falls from a faculty member from the Department of Physics. It focused on the development of a scientifically authentic video-based tool for physics education. So the PI here identified this unmet need based on the lack of existing tools that enable students to go through this process of science and actually perform a task on real life events, such as a roller coaster going down a hill and the associated mechanical energy. So for this project, the PI carried out 3 objectives. They created a new interactive video series to add to their existing portfolio. They conformed existing and new videos to industry standards so that they could be readily commercialized. And they developed a user interface that really allowed for better navigation through the web-based app. So ultimately, this project aimed to improve the efficiency of science education in Wisconsin at both the high school and university levels, and ultimately went towards better preparing those students for more open-ended, non-linear problem-solving environments that they'll likely face in their professional careers once they graduate. And what made this project competitive was the applicant again being able to clearly differentiate their project from existing competitors and approaches, as well as having those clear milestones in place. The PI had also laid out a very clear path for commercialization and the potential to sustain the project after it was over. So I'm hopeful that these few examples in the social sciences give you a feel for the different types of projects that have been supported outside of traditional STEM disciplines and more insight into what made them competitive amongst other submissions. So I'll go back to the program details themselves now. So I wanted to go through a few proposal development reminders. So while there are not many new items for this year's program, there is a continued emphasis on what we say the what, the why, and the how. And we have tried to provide very explicit instructions in the RFP to hopefully help applicants tease out, why the proposed work needs to be done, what needs to be done, and how you will do it. And if you haven't reviewed the RFP yet, I'd certainly encourage you to have a look at it, as it really provides some great information. So a few examples come to mind here. So if we think about on the STEM side, and if we take a new cancer drug as an example, and we try to simplify it, the why is it's important to cure cancer. The what is our approach is a new molecule which activates this receptor. And this is such an innovative and an amazing idea because, and this is what we need to do to show this approach has merit. The how is really, here are the experiments we plan to do and how we plan to carry them out. So if we take a social science example, and we'll use the construction trade one, the why is, it's really important to understand the gender gap in the building trades industry and find ways to stem labor shortage. The what is, our approach is to identify what factors lead to this gap and what can be done to improve it. And ultimately, the how is we plan to educate the female labor force on opportunities in these industries and plan to develop a pre-apprenticeship program for training. So lastly, what's critical for the social sciences and what you might have seen in those examples is how can this be scaled and made sustainable beyond the initial project period? And in addition to that what, why, and how factor, you'll also see increased attention paid to the market and commercial potential, as well as the competitive positioning, more for the STEM side, and as the societal impact for the social sciences and humanities. There's also going to be more focus on preliminary findings that support your approach. And some things that are new this year is a higher increase of emphasis on the level of undergraduate or graduate training. For the most part, we do see a lot of undergraduate training in our proposals. There are some that tend to not have as many students or no students included, whether they're undergraduate or graduate. And I would just highly encourage you, if you are able to incorporate student training in your project, this is really helps to make your project more competitive, because that is a big emphasis for this program. The only other addition this year is that we have limited the number of pages for the PICV to 5 pages or less. And this is just to make it easier for our review panel to get through all the applications. In terms of the structured template, I thought I would walk through the different sections. And again, would encourage you to have a look at the RFP to go through more in-depth guidelines. And you can always feel free to reach out to myself or any of our regional associates or Deborah if you have any questions about these. But briefly, we'll start with the executive summary. So, this is intended to just be that. So the reviewers want to see that the applicant is able to describe the problem or the opportunity that's being addressed, and really try, to quantify the magnitude of that problem. And that is to establish the need for the research. So why are you doing it? Why is there, what need is there? They also want to see a summary of current solutions or approaches and how these fall short, what your solution is, and then how it addresses those shortcomings or disadvantages of those current solutions. For section 2, rationale, technical approach, and preliminary data, the reviewers want to see that the technology approach described, that you have more detail here, and that there's particular emphasis on what makes it unique and innovative. So here you should include any supporting background or preliminary data that supports the rationale of your project. We would also like you to briefly describe the development steps that are required and to also identify 2 to 3 objectives and corresponding goals that must be achieved in order to demonstrate the feasibility of your approach. The research plan section 3 is really where you're going to go into much more detail about those objectives that you identified in section 2. Along with those corresponding quantitative goals, and then the methodology that's going to be used to carry out each objective. We often get asked how much detail to include here. And what I would say is that, you should be writing to somewhat of a lay audience, but providing enough technical detail on the methodology to ensure that the reviewers can see that you have the expertise and the know-how to carry out this project. Our review panel will have technical backgrounds, and so they do want to see some of that, but you don't have to go into, all of the weeds of the science, but enough to show that there's competency there and that there's feasibility. So section 4 and 5 focus on the market opportunity, the commercialization strategy, as well as the competition. And here, this is where we really want to see more information on your target market, who your end users are, the potential impact in the state, as well as beyond, and also what's your plan for commercialization or the dissemination of your results. And then also, what does the competitive landscape look like? So looking back at, what solutions currently exist and how is yours different? WiSys is happy to provide guidance for these sections. So again, please reach out to your regional associate for assistance on any of these areas. Section 6 focuses on intellectual property. So this section is a little bit more directed towards the science and technology proposals, but it can also be relevant to the social sciences. And I would encourage anyone who is applying from the social sciences or humanities to speak with us to kind of see how we can help you emphasize the potential for IP for your project if that's relevant. And then again, the reviewers want to gain a better understanding of whether intellectual property has been pursued or if it will be pursued. And this can be in the form of a patent, for the STEM projects, but it can also be copyright, know-how, trademark. There's lots of other things we can try to protect. And they also want to know, for instance, if there's any third-party arrangements or agreements that might impact the IP protection, specifically for those proposals that involve collaborating companies or institutions. The reviewers want to know whether any rights have already been assigned to or have been promised to another organization. So I would not assume that the review committee will know that. So make sure that's very explicit, because certainly with this funding, we want to see that the intellectual property is being retained here within the system or by yourselves and is being commercialized for the benefit of the state and not funding company research. So moving on to section 7. So this is where we're providing further details on your project team as well as key personnel. Section 8 is related to funding history. And really what we're looking for here is any information on potential overlapping proposals, as well as past awards that you've received that are related to the current project. Section 9 is related to the budget justification, which is pretty straightforward. And section 10 is really intended to provide you the opportunity to include any other relevant information that's not captured in the previous sections, which you feel is critical for the review process. Sections 11 and 12 are for your scientific references that are cited within the proposal, as well as any figures or tables or other supporting information that you would like to include that you, again, feel is critical for the review process. So we do provide for a proposal appendix, and I want to speak a little bit here about the format. So for the appendix, we would like you to include the primary investigator's CV, as well as any letters of support that are included. And remember that the PI-CV is now limited to 5 pages. That would go for any co-PIs or other collaborators. We would also expect to have a shorter version of the CV. I will say that letters of support from industry that really demonstrate that market or end user need is highly encouraged. And I think we're at a stage now with our committee that it's really not enough to have an applicant say, well, company X are interested or so-and-so has told me they like it. They really want to see evidence of this interest. So we appreciate that it's not always possible to get these letters of support, but I would certainly encourage you to try. And if this is something that WiSys can help facilitate, we'd be very happy to see what we can do there. But the letters of support, as you can see from some of the examples earlier, are very important and do make the projects much more competitive. So each year we receive questions on items that include budget, fringe benefits, multi-institution proposals. So I thought I'd spend a few moments on these to talk through them. So for the budget, there are expenses that are disallowed. Travel, for instance, to conferences is not allowable, but travel for purpose of collaboration is acceptable, but it should be justified and really appropriate for the project. So, if you've got a multi-institutional proposal from, say, Superior and Parkside, travel to and from for collaborative meetings may be warranted, so long as it's not excessive. And in addition, travel to sampling sites or other test facilities, that also may be warranted. Travel, however, to present a poster is not. Now, in light of the pandemic, there may not be a whole lot of travel, but we do ask if you include travel to please include a justification for it. It's maybe also a time to get creative. If you're not able to travel, what are some other means that you might collaborate and communicate with your partners? So in addition to travel, we do see a lot of funds for computers increasingly disallowed. So UW Systems' position is really that the campus is responsible for basic computer hardware, so your general laptop and so on. We have seen high-powered workstations that were, say, necessary for computing, very complex data allowed, but again, need to be highly justified and really has to be demonstrated that the applicant is not able to access that same instrumentation elsewhere. And the same goes for equipment. So we do allow equipment, but really anything over $5,000 needs that strong justification. We also encourage applicants, in particular from the comprehensive campuses, to reach out to UW-Madison and UW-Milwaukee core facilities to see what instrumentation is available and can be accessed through those programs. And lastly, as in previous years, tuition remissions as well as associated fees are not allowed, as with publication costs is just an expense that's unfortunately not allowed again this year. So in terms of fringe benefits, we've had confusion in the past, but over the past few years, we've had a consistent policy. So I just wanted to clarify again that for 21-22, fringe benefits will be covered by the GPR fringe benefit pool and will be automatically transferred to the campus by UW system. So as such, we would ask that you do not include fringe benefits in your budget or within the $50,000 limit. And if your award is made, again, those fringe benefits will be transferred after once the project is awarded. So I wanted to talk a little bit about multi-institution applications. We're seeing an increase in this, which is really fantastic because UW systems certainly encourage these. As mentioned earlier, UW-Madison and UW-Milwaukee, while limited to 2 Ignite proposals, can collaborate with a UW comprehensive. And this would not count toward their maximum, so long as the comprehensive is the lead. For multi-institution proposals, the lead institution should submit the signed cover page, 2 budget pages, one that details the entire budget, including the funding to the collaborator, as well as one that details only their institutional budget. They should also include the full proposal that uses a structured template, as well as the proposal appendix. The collaborating institution should only include the signed cover page from their institution only, their budget page, which details the funds for their institution, as well as their CV for any key personnel, again, limited to 5 pages for the CV. It's also helpful if lead institutions, when they're submitting multi-institution proposals, could identify those at the start of the process so that we can make sure we're allocating those to the same program. So as in previous years, intents to submit are required for full proposal submissions. And as you might have seen, the deadline for intents to submit is Monday, November 30th. 2020, and all intents should be submitted using the portal shown here. You can access this through this slide deck, as well as on our website and on UW Systems website. Submissions, unfortunately, are not accepted by email. And feedback will be provided to those applicants that explicitly request it in the portal submission, and that will be provided by December 18th. So when you go to submit your intent, you will have two boxes you can check, one for requesting feedback on your proposal idea and one that requests assistance in preparing your proposal. So I would certainly encourage you to check those boxes so that you can get additional resources towards this. So for applicants who have submitted an intent to submit in November, your full proposal submission will be due on Monday, January 25th, 2021. These applications should be sent by email to grants@wisys.org email address and should CC your respective grants office. Your application pack, as we mentioned before, should have the signed cover page as a PDF, the completed structured template in Word, the budget page in Excel, and the proposal appendix submitted as one PDF. For all applications, the structured template must be used, and applicants are really encouraged to follow the spacing and font guidelines and should not modify the formatting. You may have also noticed that we've asked all applicants to contact their respective grants office at least 3 weeks prior to the submission deadline. And this is really to avoid delays or non-submission of proposals. Each campus has a different policy on when they want to see proposals. So I'd encourage you to speak to your grants administrator now so that you know what the process is at your campus. So in terms of the actual review and appraisal of proposals that come in, all applications are reviewed by an external panel that's comprised of industry, business, content experts, many of which, as I mentioned before, have technical backgrounds in areas such as sustainable technology, biotech, engineering, education, humanities, and so on. There's also representation from UW System as well as WiSys. Committee members are chosen based on the technical areas of the intents to submit that come in November. And as I mentioned earlier, although the background of the panel is of a technical nature, we do ask you to write to a lay audience, but with sufficient technical detail that demonstrates that capability and feasibility. So I thought I'd spend a little bit of time on the primary evaluation checklist, which is detailed in the RFP as well. And as you submit an intent to submit, you'll also receive a separate document that provides more information. But briefly, science and technology applications are judged on a variety of criteria that cover things like economic impact, technological innovation in science, as well as overall quality of the proposal. For the impact, reviewers are looking at whether this potential impact will be near term, so in the next 1 to 3 years, or the more long term. And for those long-term projects, do you have a strategy for achieving that? Are you going to partner with someone? How are you going to get the next batch of funding that's going to be needed? They also look to whether a new technology or solution is going to be created. And again, how novel that is and where does it sit in the competitive environment? For technological innovation, I spoke about novelty, again, competitive differentiation. So if you think about, is it a Me Too technology or is it something that's truly disruptive to that industry? And does it address a commercially attractive market that's growing? And ultimately also, does it have that IP potential, intellectual property potential, because that will make it more attractive. So the more details that can be provided here, really the better. And again, I emphasize that you're encouraged to work with your technology transfer offices to fine-tune sections related to this. So for the comprehensive campuses, WiSys will serve that role. For UW-Milwaukee Research Foundation, and then for UW-Madison is WRF. So lastly here, reviewers want to see that you have a well-designed and articulated plan, it's well-written, and that you can't spell check. I can't emphasize further, spell check the grammar, and again, follow the format. A really well-written proposal is very much easier to read from the reviewer's perspective. Also touch about cost effectiveness. That is something that we see, especially in the times that we're in with budget, that your proposal is cost effective. And I mentioned earlier, opportunities for student training, highly desirable, as well as that evidence that the outcomes have potential for follow-on funding. Because this program is really meant to seed a project and hopefully will help you leverage other federal or external funding beyond this. So for the social sciences and humanities, you'll see fairly similar criteria. The main difference is, however, is really less emphasis on the intellectual property side as well as commercial potential. You're going to see more emphasis on societal impact and dissemination and scalability and things like that. They still want to see the tangible benefit and that you have a plan for achieving it, as well as how it's different to existing approaches. So that competitive differentiation is still very important for the social sciences. So over the years, we often get asked about revise and resubmit, as well as sequential year submissions. While we do encourage applicants to revise and resubmit, we encourage you to ensure that your resubmission really addresses all the feedback from the previous submission and includes any preliminary findings or data that have been generated since the last submission. I don't have any really statistics that show kind of the success rate, but I would say it's around 50-50. We don't see a lot of them, but I would say 50-50 are successful. And those that are successful because they followed those guidance. They were able to generate a little bit more data. They took the feedback to heart. They addressed it, rejigged their application, and submitted a much clearer proposal. So in terms of follow-on funding, we will consider proposals for sequential year funding, but there generally are a few that are funded. I think we've seen maybe 4 to 5 over the past couple of years. And if you are seeking follow-on, it's really key to articulate, what did you accomplish in the previous year funding? What will this year's funding be focused on, and how will it build upon that earlier data? And also that you've attempted to try other sources of funding. Because again, this is a seed program not meant to just continuously fund the same program of research. So we hope that's helpful in terms of thinking about if you're in a position to revise and resubmit from a previous submission, or if you had been successful getting funding in one year and you're looking to get follow-on funding here. So in addition to the kind of eligibility criteria that we've kind of talked through on the RFP, I also wanted to just share some points that, again, consistently come across from our review committees year to year. So in the eyes of the committee, I would say strong proposals have underpinning preliminary data that really goes towards supporting the project plan. There's evidence of that industry interest or unmet need. And in some cases, there's actually an industry collaboration already in place. Applicants are able to demonstrate that the approach they're taking is in fact innovative and different than what's out there, and that there's potential for IP protection and a high likelihood of that economic impact for the state. I think I mentioned this earlier, but also realize that the review committee is only seeing what information is at hand. So again, going back to clarifying any intellectual property situations, if there's any third parties involved, or if there's a startup involved, be sure to provide really strong justification for any expenditure that's going to that third party. I think that that's just really important, and we increasingly see proposals that don't score well because it's just not clear how that works. Reviewers also appreciate when applicants have articulated how their research addresses a commercially attractive market. And again, what sets your innovation or your solution apart from what's already out there, and how will it reach the marketplace one day? And also, as most of our projects are early stage, and some have those very long development timelines, such as the new drug or so on, be sure to map out that long-term potential. That's really important, as well as how you plan to achieve it. So if this is step A in the process, and step B is to go and get an NSF or an NIH grant, outline the path of what you're going to do. And then I mentioned earlier, again, the emphasis on student involvement and that undergraduate, graduate training component. So, and today we're just highlighting kind of important dates and deadlines. So your intent to submit is November 30th of this year. Full proposals are due January 25th of 2021. Awards are generally announced by May 1st of that fiscal year. And the confirmation of state funds have traditionally been around July 1st. So we would be hopeful that that would happen in the future. And all your expenditures, again, must be made by the completion date of August 31st, 2022, with final reports being provided for September 30th of 2022. One thing I will say, in light of the pandemic, we have been offering no-cost extensions to projects if they've been impacted by COVID. I would anticipate that that will continue this year should we continue to face impacts. So keep that in mind, but we would still anticipate that your proposals will have a start date of July 1st and an end date of the August 31st here. So last but not least, I did want to mention that WiSys is offering office hours with faculty that plan to submit and intent to submit, as well as one-on-one meetings for those that are progressing full applications in January. So more details are going to be made available about this schedule. But in the meantime, feel free to contact your WiSys regional associate directly or myself. I've listed the contact details here for each of them and the campuses that they represent. And I'll be providing support to UW Madison and UW Milwaukee applicants. And really, this can be anything from vetting the proposal idea for program fit, as well as helping you develop your proposal development in terms of IP and commercialization. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take some questions, either if they've been submitted through the Q&A or directly.
Jennifer, as we were transitioning between the two grant programs from Spark to Ignite, a question did come in. The question was, does this have to be an invention?
Right. I would say no, it doesn't have to be an invention. And maybe that's possibly more from the social sciences or humanities side. It does have to have something that's going to have impact on the state. So when we think of mostly STEM projects, we think of things that might have patents or might have, intellectual property associated with them. And, that impact to the state might be through commercialization, which often, not necessarily requires intellectual property, but does have an inventive component to it. But as some of the examples I pointed out, from the social sciences, those don't have patents around them. They don't necessarily have inventions, but they do have, more intangible intellectual property that can be disseminated and provide for that impact. And in some cases, I'd say they can and are being commercialized. So I would say not every project needs to have an invention necessarily, but it needs to be tied to an end goal that's going to have impact and provide for that.
Okay, and that's about the Spark program, correct?
Sorry, for Spark, apologies. For Spark, you do require a new invention disclosure. So apologies for that clarification. But again, that doesn't necessarily need to be a patentable idea. It could be something that is more geared towards copyright and even potentially know-how, but an invention disclosure to WiSys is required. So when we say an invention disclosure, we're referencing invention, but that could also be something that's more intangible around intellectual property as well.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. And then a question came in, and I thought about answering it, typing the answer, but I thought I would just offer it out to the crowd, but then possibly answer it. So for equipment less than $5,000 on the Ignite program, is justification required, or just simply list such equipment without justification? Of course, I would have said, from a grant proposal perspective, that all items that you request, regardless of if it's under 5,000 or more than 5,000, need to be described and explained and justified as to how they will advance or make your project effective. And I think what we're saying for the capital equipment, anything over 5,000, is that there's a heightened level of scrutiny and justification required for anything over 5,000.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Deborah. Thank you. And I think, certainly you could just simply list a piece of equipment that you're going to purchase, but in the justification section, as Deborah mentioned, it does make a lot of sense to say how you're going to use that equipment and why it's needed. But anything over 5,000, we certainly want to see, why such a high value piece of equipment is needed for the project and why you can't access it elsewhere. So is it available at a Madison or Milwaukee campus, or is it available in another comprehensive, or is it something very special that is needed? So yeah, that's great. What I would say is just please feel free to reach out to myself if you have any questions about this program or any questions about the RFP or project feasibility. Also, would be happy to facilitate introductions to our regional associates who can have that one-on-one discussion with you. And again, encourage you to work with your grants office at your local campus as well to start the process there. It's always good that they have a heads up that you're going to be submitting a proposal or interested, so that they can help you on their end. But again, if anyone has any questions for us, please reach out. All the information, our contact details will be on the slides, which will be distributed to you shortly. And again, this video will be on demand later, so you can have another look at it if you like in the future. But as I see no other questions that have come through, is that correct, Deborah?
That's correct. I do not see any additional questions.
Well, I'd like to just thank everybody for joining us today. I hope this information's been helpful for you. Thank you, Deborah, for helping with the Q&A. And Deborah is also available to support proposal development as well. So again, feel free to reach out, use this as a resource, and we hope to see some intents to submit from you in November. So thanks again. Goodbye.